Gathered here today for the funeral of Loran Wimbish. He entered into rest on February the 17th, 2020, after several months of failing health. At the age of 98 years, 9 months, and 20 days. Loran was born on April the 28th, 1921. He was born into a farming family and worked on that farm until marrying and moving on to pastor churches and work in the aircraft industry as machinist. Loran was a member of Bible Holiness Assembly of God in the ocean. He loved to read and study the Bible and also raise men with donkeys. Loran and Mary Nadine Wimbish were married on September the 4th, 1943. She preceded him in death on January the 4th, 2014. Loran is survived by 3 children, Glenn Wimbish and wife Michelle, Myrna Yellowhair and her husband Jimmy, and Jerry Wimbish. 7 grandchildren, Dawn, Ethan, Stephen, Diana, David, Sarah, and John. 6 great-grandchildren, Tyler, Bo, Cheyenne, Colt, Canyon, and Carson. Loran was preceded in death by 6 siblings. His wife of 70 years, Mary Nadine Manning Wimbish, 1 son, Kenneth Wimbish, and 1 great-grandson, Clinton. I'd like for us to pray. But, the Lord wants to help us in this service. I held Brother Wimbish in very high esteem. He was just a nice man. I've told people, if you didn't like Loran Wimbish, you just didn't like people. Because he was just a very, very nice man. And the world is going to be a darker place without him. But for those of us here that had the opportunity and privilege to know him and have fellowship with him, today we want to, while we're showing our respect, we want to express our gratitude. Not everybody. Your family need to know this, I'm sure, but not everybody had a father or a grandfather like y'all had. Let's pray. Father, I thank you today for Brother Wimbish. I really wish he could have stayed with us longer, but I thank you for the time that we've had him. Now I ask you that you would help us in this service today. I pray that this service would be, it'd be fitting to honor a man as good as Brother Wimbish was. Now we commit it into your hands. In Jesus' name. Amen. Brother Paul will sing.
I asked Jerry if I could just say a word before I sang. I love Brother and Sister Wimbish more than anybody that wasn't my family probably in this whole world. And I'm just so thankful that he's with the Lord and Sister Wimbish again. But anyway, I'm going to try to sing This Is Just What Heaven Means to Me this morning. One of their favorite songs. A country where no twilight shadows deepen, storm clouds ever gather. Now this is just what heaven means to me. What will it be when we get over yonder and join the throng around the glassy sea to greet our loved ones and crown Christ forever? Oh, this is just what heaven means to me. And when at last we see the face of Jesus, before whose image other loves all flee, and when they crown him Lord of all, I'll be there. Oh, this is just what heaven means to me. What will it be when we get over yonder and join the throng around the glassy sea to meet our loved ones and crown Christ forever? Oh, this is just what heaven means to me. A place where there is no misunderstanding, and from all enmity and strife we're free. No unkind words to wound the heart are spoken. Now this is just what heaven means to me. What will it be when we get over yonder and join the throng around the glassy sea to meet our loved ones and crown Christ forever? Oh, this is just what heaven means to me.
I've received phone calls and texts over the past week, each of them expressing their sorrow. But this is not a sorrowful day, this is a happy day. So, my dad lived a really nice life, escaped major illnesses and things like that. So he was getting ready to probably go through some suffering, so he chose the right time to leave. So I got to keep him 63 years, so I got a fair deal and he got a fair deal. So, so if you feel sorry, that's okay, but there's, it's also a happy day. As the pastor mentioned, my dad was born into a farming family, and he told a lot of stories about picking cotton all day by hand, and they got 50 cents a day for picking that cotton, and they farmed with horses. He would walk 15 or 20 miles a day behind a pair of horses, playing the ground. He said all that was fun, and he enjoyed it, and I think he got a little too much sun out there. So, horses and wagons were used, even though there was cars at that time, but not everybody had one. Eventually tractors and cars came into that area, and one John Deere tractor would do the same work as 5 teams of mules. So farming got a little easier, and one of their farmers ordered a brand new Ford truck one time. It came in on a flat car on the railroad. And then they discovered nobody knew how to start it or get it off the railroad. So they had to hook a team of mules to it and pull it off. And somebody got on horseback and rode to Fort Smith, Arkansas, about 15 miles away, to get somebody to come out there and show them how to operate this truck. And so that was the beginnings of mechanical things for them. When Dad was 17, he was saved in a Rush Harbor camp meeting, and that event started him towards about a 50 or 60 year pastoring career. At that time, they had a lot of these camp meetings, tent meetings, and each of them were normally planned for a couple of weeks. And I was looking at pictures of some of that stuff my dad had, and there'd be a big tent tied to trees and stuff like that, and outside would be Model T Fords and Model A Fords and horses and buggies and all kinds of stuff. This is a black and white picture. And by the door of this tent, there was a huge pile of garbage. It looked like garbage to me. And I asked him, why did they pile garbage by the door of the tent? Why didn't they take it around back and burn it? Stuff like that. He said, well, that's not garbage. That's medical equipment. Back then, medical equipment was mainly built out of wood and had a few metal components, but mostly wood. Wheelchairs, crutches, leg braces, things like that. He said, that's the people that would get healed in those camp meetings. And they said, we're not dragging that stuff back home with us. It's going in the trash. So they would pile it all up, and then these revivals would wind up lasting, most of them, 6 or 8 weeks. And then at the end of the deal, they would pull the tent down, and they'd set fire to all that stuff and burn it in a big bonfire. So those people back then believed in the promises that was in the Bible. And that's what happened. So okay, you want me to start over? Okay.
Yeah, it's okay. You're doing a good job.
My dad wanted a little piece of that action, so he started, putting churches where there wasn't any. And, he would, get the membership up. Then he would, turn the church over to a pastor that wanted to do that for a career. And, then he would move on and start another church. One of the churches, well, the first one he started with was an old abandoned church that had failed and closed up for some reason. And he couldn't find out who owned the property, so he just opened up the doors. And buildings weren't locked back then like they are now, but he opened up the doors and ran broom through it, and him and another man and my mom and the other guy's wife started a revival. And they was gonna go 2 weeks. So they showed up every night, did 2 weeks of that, hardly anybody came. So they was pretty disappointed, and they had a discussion about it, and they come up with a real crazy idea. Let's go another week. So they did. The third week, people packed the house out. People were saved. People were healed. And so that was the first experience that he told me about. Another one was in the state of Arkansas, a little town called Paris, Arkansas. And he took over a little church there that was out in the country, a little community called Greasy Valley. And he pastored it a little while, and then one day, one of his members called him. This man was a dairy farmer. And he said, "Pastor, I got a problem. My cows are dying one at a time, and we don't know what's causing it. The veterinarian's been out here. He don't know. He can't find anything wrong with the dead cows or the live cows. And if this keeps going, I'm gonna be bankrupt." So my dad was a little suspicious. Nothing was wrong with these cows. So he went by the church and he looked at the records of the people that paid tithe. And he discovered this man's name wasn't on there. So he drove on out to the farm, and he said, "Show me all these cows and stuff like that." So he gave him a tour of the farm. And he said, sure enough, there wasn't nothing wrong with any of the cows. They looked just fine. He said, "I think I know what your problem is." He said, "Have you been paying your tithe?" And the man hung his head. He said, "No." He said, "Well, what we're going to do right now, we're going to kneel down and pray right here in this pasture. And you're going to repent for that and correct your habits." And he said, "I think everything will be okay." So they did that, and the man honored his commitment. The cows quit dying, and milk production went up. Everything was fine. He just had that suspicion that that was the problem. So another situation was he opened up a church. Well, the one where he opened up a church that he didn't even know who owned it. There was several years later, we were on a reunion trip down there to a family reunion, and a man and a lady walked up to him. They said, "Hey, are you the Loran that preached that 3-week revival down there?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, we attended that separately, and were saved, and then we wound up getting married, and then eventually we wound up pastoring that same church for many years." So a lot of times when you plant a seed, you don't know when you're going to see the results. Maybe a long time later, maybe instantly. So anyway, my dad repeated this process several times, and when I was about 4 or 5 years old, he took over a church. Well, he didn't take over a church. He went to Andover, Kansas. He discovered they didn't have a Assembly of God church, so he went door to door and he asked people if there was a church there, would they come to it? And enough people said yes, so he rented an old abandoned rundown gas station for $15 a month, and he set up the platform in the sales area of the gas station and knocked a little wall out, and the benches were in the lube area where they greased cars and changed oil and fixed the tires. And they approved that, and he rented a house in town and expanded the kitchen and dining room and living room area was a sanctuary, and the bedrooms were the Sunday school classrooms. And then he turned that church over to another pastor. That pastor moved out of the house into a church building, and then eventually they bought property, built a brand new building. And Myrna and I were there a few years back to see that. And of course, nobody knew of the beginnings of that church, but we did. And I thought, we're the only ones in here that knows how this thing started. And they'd been through a few pastors during that time, and some of the people, or none of them actually, was there when it started. So I felt proud that my dad had got the ball rolling on something like that. Starting, I mean, this old gas station, no telling when it was built, because in 1960 it was about to fall down. It had used its life, and it was abandoned. And now they're in this brand new church, and that church is still in existence now, about 60 years later. That church is still going. So that's just what he liked to do. He didn't care nothing about doing it full time. He wanted to just put churches where there wasn't any. While we lived there in Andover, he worked at Boeing Aircraft as an aircraft machinist. And at that job, that's when they gave employees an hour for lunch every day back then. they gave him a little room he could use, and he had Bible study while they're eating their lunch. Anybody that wanted to could come in, and he would have Bible study while they're eating their food. And so he couldn't even eat his lunch without telling somebody about Jesus. So another ministry that he was involved in Wichita was the Sedgwick County Jailhouse. He would, after preaching on Sunday and eating lunch, he would go to the jailhouse in the afternoon and visit with the prisoners, see if he could help some of them. And he encountered some interesting people at that place. Probably the most interesting story I know of goes like this. One day, as the sun came up over Wichita, Kansas, the bodies of 4 women were discovered. And they had been murdered, and not very nicely so. The Wichita police started an investigation, try to figure out who was responsible for this crime. And a couple of days later, the bodies of 2 more women were found in the state of Indiana. And back at this time, in the 1960s, there was not instant communication like we have now. And but the Indiana authorities had heard about the Wichita murders, because it's kind of high profile situation. So they contacted the Wichita authorities and they shared information, and they decided all 6 of those murders were committed by the same person. And so after a few days, the Wichita police decided who did this, and they arrested a man by the name of Frank Swinney. And they booked him in the Sedgwick County Jail. Well, the next Sunday, my dad walks into jail, and he starts talking to an inmate. And he explains, I'm a local pastor, and I come in here to visit people, and I'd like to share the gospel with you. And Frank said, I don't know what the gospel is, but I'll listen to you. So, Dad said he couldn't help him with the situation he had at hand. The law would have to take care of that. But he said, I can change where you go for eternity. So Dad asked him, do you know anything about God or the Bible or Jesus or heaven or hell or anything? He said, no, I don't know nothing about that. He had grew up in a pretty nasty home. Parents were criminals, he was a criminal. So my dad explained the plan of salvation to him. Well, Frank couldn't believe that somebody who had done what he had done, he couldn't believe anybody would do anything nice for him. So he couldn't quite grasp this stuff. He wasn't really sure Dad was telling him the truth. So Dad visited him a few weeks. And one day he walked in there and Frank said, I got something good to tell you. He said, a thought came to me this week that everyone in the world would want me to hang for this and burn in hell forever. And he said, you're the only person in the world that has shown concern for my future. And he said, that tells me that your God is the one true God. And he said, Pastor, I want to know the God that you know. so Dad led him to Christ right there on the concrete floor with steel bars between them. And my dad gave him a Bible, and then he left. The next week, when my dad went back, Frank was a little disturbed. So Dad said, "What's up, Frank?" He said, I got a problem. He said, I'm reading here that if you're Christian, you can't tell something that's not true. And Dad said, well, that's the general idea. I'm going to back up here a minute. I'm not a public speaker, in case you didn't notice. Frank would tell my dad, during this time, Dad was trying to inform him of what he would do. He would say, "Pastor, you don't know the things I've done." He said, "Yeah, I know the things you've done. It's been in the paper, it's been on the radio." He said, "No," he says, "that's them 6 murders, that's not the only thing I've done, that's just the last thing that I did." And so anyway, Dad was able to win him to Christ, and but he got disturbed about this not telling the truth. He said, when I was arrested, they read the charges to me, and I pled not guilty. And he said, that's not true. So what should I do? So Dad told him that what you can do when your trial comes up and the judge asks for opening arguments, you can stand up and ask for permission to address the court. Now at that time, your defense attorney is going to lose his mind. And he's going to tell you to shut up and sit down and let him do the talking. But if you insist, the judge will let you talk. You tell them about your whole life, all the way up to these events that landed you in jail. So then you can plead guilty and ask for the mercy of the court on sentencing. And you're probably not going to get a whole lot of mercy. Probably just come down from the death penalty to life without parole. So Frank did that. He pled guilty and went off to prison. And the last time my dad heard anything about him, which was way back then, he had started a Bible study in the prison for other inmates that was interested in that type of thing. So I thought that was a fairly interesting story. And which brings up something that I'm very proud of my dad for. I can proudly say my dad has been in jail more times than 100 criminals. And occasionally my dad would preach a sermon somewhere or a revival. And after the sermon, somebody in the audience would look him up. It'd be some other pastor or something like that. They would compliment him on his delivery, and they wanted to know where he went to Bible college and seminary and all that stuff. And the truth is, he didn't go to any of them things. He barely finished 8th grade in public school. So my dad would say, he'd kind of smile and say, my seminary was walking through dirt all day, looking at the back of two mules. So, for an educated man to ask my dad, you know, to be impressed with my dad's delivery, that tells me that being educated and smart is not as important as being humble and sensitive to God's wishes. So, the power for my dad's successes came from God, and the obedience came from my dad. When you combine God's power with obedience, things will happen. And a lot of people have been saved because of my dad's obedience to the command to teach and preach the gospel. He didn't go to other countries, but he used everything he could, the opportunity that he could, in the area where he lived. And he knew everyone would not be interested. Everyone would not accept. But he just wanted everybody to have the opportunity to hear about Jesus. I want to tell you about a feeling my dad used to give me when I was 3, 4, and 5 years old. I'm 63 now, so that's 59 years ago, 60. My dad had a heavy beard, and even though he shaved every night, by the time he came home from work the next day, his face was like a wire brush. You remember that, Myrna? And I would go to the back door to meet him when I heard him pull in. And he would pick me up and hug me. And he'd press my little face. Up against his old rough, scratchy face. And it almost hurt. But that was the best feeling I've ever had. I still remember what it feels like. Now I can't read my paper. Over the years, I've asked God a few times to just let me live long enough to see my parents gone. I wanted to make sure there was always somebody there to take care of them. And I really didn't care what he did after that. So now with both of them gone, I kind of wished I hadn't said that second part. I have one more point to make, but before I do, I want to thank all of you for coming out and celebrating my dad's life. I know he'd want to be here, he'd want to talk with all of you. He loved all his relatives and all his friends. And he also, kind of left something out here, he also worked in this church for quite a few years as a Sunday school teacher, and he took the college students on field trips to other churches and things like that. So I appreciate all of you showing up. My final point is this. My dad was wonderful to my mom, and there was 4 of us kids. 2 of us are here today. And even though he was busy pastoring churches, and he worked a full-time job at the same time, and worked in the jailhouse, he still had time to play with us, so we played baseball and different things there at the house. And I don't know how he did it all, but one thing that sticks in my mind is the population of the world in 1956, when I was born, was about 3 billion people. And I got to be his kid out of all them people. Some people throughout my dad's life might say that he wasn't perfect, and I suppose they might be right. Because nobody's perfect. But he was perfect enough for me. Thank you for coming out.
That was the best eulogy I've ever heard. I remember one time I was leading the singing over there at the church, and Jerry Wimbish walked down the aisle while I was leading the singing and fell in the altar and gave his heart to the Lord. And that was probably the best day of Loran and Nadine Wimbish's life. I'm kind of homesick for a country to which I've never been before. No sad goodbyes will ever there be spoken, and time won't matter anymore. Beulah land, I'm longing for you. And someday on thee I'll stand, where my home shall be eternal. Beulah land, sweet Beulah land, I'm looking down across the river to where my faith is gonna end inside. It's just a few more weary days to labor, and then I'll take my heavenly flight. Beulah land, I'm longing for you. And someday
I was thinking as Brother Jared talked about his dad and mom. If the Bible's true, and I believe it is, and we are compassed about the great cloud of witnesses, I believe his mom and dad liked that eulogy. I got a verse I want to read from Proverbs chapter 10, verse 7. I'm just going to read a little piece of it. It says, the memory of the just is blessed. Now that phrase reminds us of a beatitude that Jesus said in Matthew 5:4. He said, blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Now the memory of the just has its own built-in comfort. Y'all need to remember that. I'm sure that everybody that loved Brother Wimbish is mourning his loss. But when you think about it, especially his family, you were blessed to have him in your life. Amen. Brother Canner knew Brother Wimbish for many years, and I was talking to him yesterday, and he said, you know, Brother Taylor, there's one thing I like to say about Brother Wimbish. He said, I never heard anyone say a bad word about him. And I hadn't thought about it like that, but I'll just tell you, if you didn't like Brother and Sister Wimbish, you just didn't like people. That is all there was to it. I mean, the word just, the memory of the just, as it's used in that verse, Proverbs 10:7, it means acting on being in conformity to what is morally upright and good. That's what just means in that context. And so what it's saying there is the memory of, that's referring to the memorial of it. A memorial service like this where we take time to recall how good a man Brother Wimbish was. And the many things that we are blessed because we know and knew him. Brother Wimbish was a just man. He was a good man. He tried to be a sincere Christian. You know, I've got a couple things to say about this. It won't take me long, but Brother Wimbish, he fits the description the Bible gives of a man named Barnabas. I looked this up this morning, Acts chapter 11 and verse 24. It's talking about Barnabas, but this fits Brother Wimbish. It says, for he was a good man and full of the Holy Ghost and of faith, and much people was added unto the Lord. Yes. Well, I heard Brother Jerry talking about his dad's work in the kingdom. I mean, a good man. That phrase covers a lot of territory. I mean, Brother Wimbish was a good Christian. He was a good preacher. He was a good Sunday school teacher. He was a good soul winner. He was a good husband. He was a good dad. Brother Wimbish tried to be good at everything he did. I don't know if the children know this, but your dad and my dad had something in common. My dad was a machinist. He worked, of course, we lived back in Virginia. My dad worked for the federal government, and he was a machinist. And when he was a young guy, he got a job, started out working at O.L. Martin's aircraft factory there near National Airport down in D.C. But Brother Wimbish, he you know, a guy that does machine work, they've got to be particular. I mean, they get it down to the fine numbers. And Brother Wimbish carried that over into his spiritual life. He had it down to a science. I mean, he worked on it. He pastored churches, he preached revivals, he taught Sunday school, he took Bible school students on ministry trips. He was a good man. There's no other way to say it, but he was a good man. And the name Barnabas is actually a nickname. His real name was Joseph, this guy in the Bible. But Barnabas was such a help and a strength to everyone that knew him that they started calling him Barnabas. And Barnabas means, son of consolation. That he was just good to be around. It was just awesome to be around him. He was an encouragement to you. I don't know about you, but y'all ever hear that old song, Home, Home on the Range? Where never was heard a discouraging word. That's the way Brother Wimbish was. I don't ever remember him saying any derogatory, sad, sour stuff. That guy was always looking up. Brother Wimbish was a Barnabas. He put the kingdom first. He helped other people do great things, and he gave people a chance to succeed. I bring that up because he was over the outreach, and he took kids on outreach trips and stuff here from the school and stuff years ago, and he could have done a lot of the stuff that was going on in that himself, but he didn't. He tried to get these young people to get involved and do something significant for God. He gave people a chance to succeed. But Brother Wimbish reminded me of a disciple that Paul met in Cyprus. His name was Nason. Now listen what it says about him. It says, there went with us also certain of the disciples of Caesarea, and but they brought with them one Nason of Cyprus, an old disciple, whom we should lodge. Now, Nason was an old disciple. Now, I'm not speaking disparately of Brother Wimbish, but 98, there ain't a lot of folks who make it that long. But he was an old disciple in more ways than that. See, Brother Wimbish, 98 years, 9 months, and 2 days old, or whatever it was, 20 days. But he was an old disciple in another way. Brother Wimbish had been a faithful Christian for a long. How many O's is that? Long time. The Bible says that gray hair is a glory if it be found in the way of righteousness. That means that we should commend men like Brother Wimbish for the faithfulness that they showed down through the years. Brother Wimbish was masterful at handling the limitations of life too. Now, what I mean by that is when he could no longer do what he once did, and pastor and all the things that he once did, he did what he could. That's commendable when you can't do what you would like to do, but you still do what you can do. I'm telling you, I went over there, that man, he pastored that rest home. He ministered to those people. When people came to the nursing home to have church service, he was there, man. He had his guitar, and Brother Wimbish, he couldn't stop the fact that he was getting old, but he was determined not to let the fire go out in his soul. I'd send Bible school students over to visit Brother Wimbish when he was there in the home, but what these kids didn't know is that I sent them over there for their sake, not his. Yeah, I did. I know we're supposed to visit, the sick and afflicted and all that kind of stuff, and that was good. But the thing of it is, I thought it's good for a young aspiring minister to see a preacher in his 90s that's still on fire. Brother Wimbish was visible evidence that usefulness in God's kingdom is not reserved for young people. He was an old disciple, and he was a wonderful blessing. Brother D.C. Branham used to say, he said, everybody says a new broom sweeps clean, but them old brooms know where all the cobwebs and the dust is. Brother Wimbish knew how to minister to people. Third, to the family, Brother Wimbish, I want to offer my deepest sympathy. But at the same time, I want to congratulate you because you have a wonderful heritage. Psalm 16:6 says, the lines are fallen unto me in pleasant places, yea, I have a goodly heritage. Praise the Lord, Sister Bernie, you got it. The phrase goodly heritage is speaking of something good that has been handed down to you from the previous generation. I mean, you take notice in the future. I'm just telling you, family members, you take notice in the future. When someone finds out that you're Loran Wimbish's son, daughter, grandson, or granddaughter, they're going to light up and they're going to tell you how much they loved Brother Wimbish. You're going to find out influences that he had on people that you have never seen. Brother Wimbish was a good example of a sincere, serious-minded Christian. And he was a man of great spiritual energy. Any of you young, aspiring ministers in his family, you need to try to get a hold of that. He was always looking for something that he could do for the Lord. And when he found it, he did it. He just did it. When God called him as a young man, he did exactly what Jesus said to do. And I asked somebody to give me a number. I got a copy of that book, Johnny Plowboy. And I tell you what, when that plowboy laid his hand to the plow, he never looked back. Yeah. He gave his all to ministry. He not only did all he could, but he tried to help other people see that they had potential. That was one of the things I was always struck by the fact that Brother Wimbish wanted to know, how are you doing? What are you doing? What else could you do? It wasn't all about him. He wanted to help other people reach their potential. He was a man of integrity. He was a godly man with just. Once you get this, he was a godly man with just the right amount of humility. And what I mean by that, he was great, but he didn't seem to know it. It was almost as if the Lord had hid it from him. He was a man of vision. I mean, he saw his when he was I'm just telling you, I've been around a long time. I've visited a lot of people that was in rest homes, and I can tell you one thing right now, Brother Wimbish was the most buoyant. I mean, he was like a fishing cork, man. It didn't make any difference how far the devil tried to push him down. He'd always pop back up to the top. And one of the things that really struck me is that he saw in the midst of his adversity, because I can tell you right now, he would have rather been home. But he saw in the midst of his adversity an opportunity for God to use him. And so he did his best to share the gospel with them people there. I'm serious. I'd go over there sometimes, and it seemed like, I don't know why I timed it that way, but I'd always wind up getting there when he was eating. So I'd get to sit down at the table with him, and he'd always talk to the people around him about their soul. He walked in the Spirit. His dining room table was like a church in the nursing home. I mean, sit down, Brother Taylor. He'd say, and tell me something you just read that was in the Bible. But the most important of all, not only did Loran Wimbish live by faith, but he has entered the faithful hall of fame in Hebrews 11:13. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Now, one more thing I want to say to you, the family especially. Years ago, I was laying stone on the front of my brother's house back in Notesville, Virginia, and I had the radio on. And revival time. It was a Saturday morning, and revival time came on. C.M. Ward. It was C.M. Ward's last broadcast. And I heard that old man say something that really stuck in my heart. He said, in years to come, if anyone ever says anything about C.M. Ward, let it be said that he loved Jesus. Well, if anything could be said about Brother Wimbish, that can be said. He loved Jesus. Let's pray. Father, we know that our loss is heaven's gain, and we all understand it, but we still feel lost. I pray for this family because they have entered into an entirely different world than the one they've known. They're not going to be able to talk to Dad like they used to, and there's going to come times in the not too distant future they're going to think of something that happened, something they're going to say to themselves, I'm going to ask Dad about that. But then they're going to remember that Dad ain't here to ask. So I pray that you'd comfort them, and comfort them especially with the fact of knowing that if they make sure their calling an election is sure, that if they make sure that it's well with their soul, that if they'll put their faith and confidence in the same Savior Brother Wimbish did, that they're going to be a great reunion day one of these days. So I commend them into your hands, Lord. I just ask you that you'd help us to be thankful for having had such a great friend as Brother Wimbish. Bless the remainder of the service today. In Jesus' name. Remainder of this service will be concluded at the graveside.